Okay, so tonight we are going to start talking about disability advocacy, so knowing your rights. Before we start, I would just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today or tonight. So what is disability advocacy? And I'm trying to work out where I can put this. So disability advocacy is essentially acting or speaking or writing to promote, protect or defend human rights of people with disability. So there's a lot saying, well, when the NDIA first rolled out the NDIS scheme, there was a lot of people saying, oh, when the NDIS rolls out, we won't need advocates because the autonomy of the scheme means that everyone's going to have their needs met and everything. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, or the NDIA aren't quite there yet, and disability advocates are still required. And also there are a number of things that that the NDIA can't really help with. So other areas around health, education, housing, things like that, where the NDIA aren't able to support essentially in those mainstream services, a disability advocate may be required if there are issues in those areas. So the Australian government and some state and territory governments fund independent advocacy to help people with disability who face challenges or are unable to advocate themselves. So unfortunately, and you guys might have had some dealings with this or might have experienced this, there has been a lot of cuts within the tenders won or within the government grants for advocates in Australia, which has been really disappointing, especially around advocacy and the NDIS. So a lot of advocates, if you need an advocate around an NDIS, whether it's housing or whether it's something else, you will often find that people will say, oh, we are unable to support anyone with an NDIS issue. So they can help with housing or with education or with health, but when it comes to NDIS, they can't. There still are some advocates that can and receive funding, but it is really, it's not good, and I hope that they change it soon, because it means that there's a lot of people self-representing at the AAT and in different cases, which is concerning and not fair. So but in terms of education and health, there are still lots of supports out there when it comes to disability advocacy, but when it comes to NDIS, there are some other avenues which I'll talk about towards the end, but just so you know, that you'll probably find that there's a lot of places that can't support at this stage. But there are some ways we can get around it, which I'll talk to you about soon. So an independent advocate is essentially independent of organisations providing supports or services to the person with disability. So they can't be advocating and then working in the same place. So the advocate provides independent advocacy for the person with disability to assist the person to exercise choice and control. We hear a lot about choice and control in the NDIS, and this is external to that. So if there's an issue with health or another area, they will support to exercise that choice and control. So to help the person with disability have their voice heard, acts at the direction of the person with a disability, reflecting the person with the disability's express wishes, preferences, and rights, and free of relevant conflicts of interest. So they do not have anything to do with the organisation or the area that the person with disability is having issues with. Now, this system also is not perfect. I so completely respect and really understand that. I've worked with people who are working with an advocate, and I can feel the frustration and experience that same frustration with advocates being like, you need to do more. So some advocates aren't great, but there are some really fantastic advocates out there. So they really, these are an independent advocate really should be meeting this criteria. They really should be supporting a person to exercise their choice and control, helping a person have their voice heard, and really acting in the direction of the person with disability, completely person-centered, and not acting on their best interest, but on the actual person's best interest. So if that's not happening, it's definitely time to find a different advocate. So why does it matter? So a disability advocate must be independent and act solely in the interest of the person with a disability who they are supporting. Essentially, if they're not, then it really is a conflict of interest. And it's if you have an issue with health and the person is from there, then there's that risk that they are going to benefit in some way or influence the outcome, which isn't going to benefit the person. It's going to benefit the person in health rather than the person with a disability. So government-funded independent advocates can act solely on the side of the person with disability without conflict of interest. So in terms of, and I mean, we're talking in the space here, all of the webinars up until this point have really been focused on NDIS. So a lot of participants that come to these webinars are NDIS participants. So I just wanted to add a couple of things here from, it can be a bit confusing with the NDIS and advocacy, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But I guess when it comes to independent advocates and the NDIS, it is really separate. So the difference is that an independent advocate is completely independent of the NDIS. So they're not a local area coordinator, they're not a planner, they're not an NDIS support coordinator or a recovery coach, they're not a support worker or someone who is funded by the NDIS. If they're advocating for you, whether it's at the AAT or in conferences or with a local member or to the NDIA, they can't be charging for that time under a person's NDIS plan, and it cannot be an LAC or a local area coordinator or a support coordinator. So a support coordinator or an LAC or a support worker or a recovery coach or someone who's getting funded through the NDIS, they can help with building your capacity, with preparing documents, with helping that organization and helping with that communication to sort of gather the information. But when it comes to actually communicating or representing or speaking on the behalf of a person with disability, they're unable to do that, and they are unable to charge. So we often find that there is, now I know some people might read a lot about the AAT cases, and I do know that there was the case where the NDIS support coordinator represented at the AAT, and that was a very big thing because it never happens, and it hasn't set a precedent. There is still a lot of pushback from the AAT that if the person's a support coordinator, then they are not to be representing or advocating on behalf of the participant. However, if that person has no other support and there's absolutely no one else in their life, and the support coordinator is not going to benefit at all, and is not charging, is like just purely there to support, then they might be an exception. And that's what happened in this case. However, it is very rare and it doesn't often happen. And mostly, no one to do with the NDIS can support in advocating, whether it's for housing, for the AAT, or for any other supports, whether it's mainstream or community, or whether it's NDIS related. So it is very different. They are very different roles. So I guess that it's sort of like, well, and this was sort of what I said at the beginning, why when the NDIS rolled out, then it was like, oh, we don't need advocates anymore. But I guess independent advocates do assist with different things to what NDIS supports provide. So if it's a support coordinator or someone else, they can support the individual to understand their rights and responsibilities. They can help to put together complaints, or like write letters and things like that, to help to communicate what they need to communicate, but they cannot represent. So it is essentially, they can provide those capacity building supports, but essentially an independent advocate should really be doing those things. But if there's a gap there and that's not happening, then potentially an NDIS support coordinator or support person can help. There is an NDIS support coordinator isn't just supporting with NDIS, they do support with mainstream community and informal supports as well. So there is a little bit of that crossover, but if there is an independent advocate involved, then there really needs to be a discussion about who's doing what. So there isn't not that conflict of interest, or not that real crossover of supports or duplication of supports essentially. So for a independent advocate, they can really help to access housing, education and other state systems, and resolve complex service provision or complaints issues, or to leave domestic violence. And none of these are really available through NDIS. So an NDIS support coordinator, you may talk to them about what's happening, and then the support coordinator may say, okay, I think it's time for us to get a disability advocate involved, and they can help to link in and to get you an independent advocate. But essentially, they're not providing or representing the way an independent advocate would. So the NDIS, and we just spoke a little bit about this, but the NDIS essentially will fund some forms of decision-making support. So support coordination, support to develop skills for decision-making. So that can be with clinicians, so clinical support, or it can be with support coordinator, or it can be with support workers. So building those supports, like I said, to help develop the knowledge and skills for making choices and decisions, helping to educate, helping to build that capacity to understand, to put together information, information and training about how to make complaints, information about where to make complaints. So helping to build that capacity, helping to put that together, and to link in to an advocate if that is necessary. So although advocacy organisations have supported people with disability in similar ways, NDIS funded supports are not the same as an independent advocacy support, and will not replace the role of an independent advocate. From my point of view, I don't think advocates will ever not be needed. It doesn't matter how perfect they get the NDIS. There will always be a need for independent advocates in the other areas of daily life, work, education, housing, health, people are still going to need independent advocates for that. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't the case. I wish people didn't have to be treated or have to deal or be treated the way that, you know, a lot of people are each and every day. So I think we'll always need independent advocates, but I guess understanding the role and understanding that there is a difference between the two. So how do you find an independent advocate? These two links are quite helpful. So this first link, you can find an advocate. This second link, there are actually quite a lot of useful resources, and there are heaps of links in that second link. And some of the links, sorry, said links so many times. Some of the links, if you click into it, has a lot of resources that you can use to build a case or to understand where to go next. But absolutely, I really encourage you to speak to your NDIS support coordinator if you're having issues in other areas of your life. They aren't just for NDIS support, so you can speak to them about lots of other things that are going on for you. And even though the support coordinator may not be able to actually support the full way, they should be able to help link you in to supports that can. So essentially, they are there to coordinate and link supports, not just for NDIS, but for mainstream and community as well. So, and for building your capacity to be able to build those skills. I can see that there's a few questions, there's a few comments in the chat. Ali, are there any questions?
So Rando had a question about what the AAT was, and I thought that you might come on to that in the second half. Is that true?
I will come on to, we will talk about the AAT, yes, because we're going to talk about the NDIA feedback and complaints in a second, but I'll just explain what the AAT is. The AAT is an administrative appeals tribunal. And there's a lot of people you hear on the news now, and there's a lot of things in the media and stuff about how a lot of NDIS cases are going to the AAT, and it's costing the NDIA a lot of money. So essentially, if someone, and we will talk about this in a sec, but if someone has a decision come back from the NDIS, so they have funding that comes back and they're not happy with it, then they will choose to appeal that or review that decision. If that then comes back again and it's declined again, there's two options. You can either go down the change of situation. So if something in that person's life has changed, then can go down that route and try one more time, or you go straight to the AAT. If you go down the change of situation and it gets declined again, then the next step, if you want to appeal it again, is to go to the AAT. And that's where it is essentially an independent from the NDIA. There's a representative from the NDIA that's present with a lawyer. And there's a number of discussions that happen through that process. And if that doesn't get resolved through the AAT, then it needs to go to hearing. It needs to go before a court or before a judge, and then they make the decision. So a lot of cases, when they go to AAT, they don't get to the hearing stage because it's even more expensive for the NDIA. So it usually tends to be resolved within that back and forth discussion. But essentially, that's what happens if you have an access decision. So if someone's accessing the NDIA or wanting to access the NDIS and it gets declined, their access request gets declined, they review it again, gets declined again, they can then go to the AAT to have it appealed, or if there's a funding decision. So it's often around like big AAT items or housing, but it can be around therapy supports, or it can be around core supports. However, now, and going off on a little bit of a tangent, but now the last July, the price guide changed, and as it does every year, but one of the changes that was made in July last year was that all capacity building supports, so all therapy supports, are now, there is a line item or an item code in core. So it is even more flexible now, a person's NDIS plan. So whereas before it wasn't as flexible, and so there was that pushback. So some AAT cases could be about therapy. Now it's less likely because people can use their core more flexibly. So they can use that for therapy. So it's mainly around housing and AT, assistive tech, or home modifications, where the big AAT cases are, or about service dogs. That's a big one. And everyone's probably heard of the one around the sex worker. So there are usually, it's usually when there's a support that is quite big decision, or if it's something that is not funded a lot. So, oh yeah, are there any, Ali, are there any other questions?
There is a comment from Rando there as well, saying that internalized ableism is already an issue for those with disability, and he can see it, the unconscious biases, being an issue in advocacy.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, it is, I don't see it going away, but I wish it would. I think that there is that, yeah, people, it shouldn't be that way. And it makes me quite upset when I hear it happening, but unfortunately it is 100%. So I think there can be crappy advocates as well, just as there can be crappy anyone. So I think really looking around if you need an advocate, and don't settle. And if you don't feel like it's the service that you have expected, then absolutely speak up, and say something. Like, I really don't think that it's, I feel like there's so many people that don't feel like they can speak up because, well, they might not, people don't know any different. If they've never been through this before, and then they are met with not what they expected, but they just feel like, no, it's just, this is just how it is. No, it often isn't. So trust yourself, because at the end of the day, everyone deserves to be treated with respect and be, I guarantee that you are right. If you are feeling like doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel like how an advocate should be, how this should be going, I guarantee that you're right. So yeah, see if you can look around to find someone else. There are a lot of great people, or awesome people out there doing awesome work, really person-centered, and yeah, really making big differences. But there are also lots of crap people. So yeah, unfortunately. So we did, and I think, Rando, I think we were talking about this last year. We touched on it, and we said we would talk about it in one of the future sessions. So the participant service charter, and so you might hear it if you call the NDIA, that long spiel at the beginning. They do talk about the participant service charter. Essentially, it is a service guarantee that they say, and what they kind of try and hold their themselves accountable for. So it is on here in the link, but it is on the NDIS website. And essentially it will say what you can expect from the NDIS. That includes timeframes. So whether it's a complaint, whether it is feedback, whether it is you're waiting for a review decision, or you're waiting for an AT request or housing decision or whatever it is, they have in the service charter, it will be explained on how many days you're expected to wait. So, and if it is over that amount of time, then it 100% warrants that feedback and complaints because it's not acceptable. Obviously, the NDIA get backed up like most things, but you know, it's really not an excuse. So and unfortunately, what can happen, and this is just one example, so say you have you've got a plan review coming up, or a plan reassessment it's now called, and you haven't been contacted and you're just waiting. You've tried to call the NDIA or tried to call your LAC, and you're waiting, and then it hits the last day of your plan. So the NDIA have it set up that you will never go a day without an NDIS plan, an active NDIS plan. So the following day you'll get pretty much your plan rolled over. So you'll get the same plan again, or it extended. So the date will extend for 1 year, and you'll have your current money plus the same money again for 1 year. So they do that to make sure that no one is left without a plan. But what happens is then you essentially go to the bottom of their list. You won't be on alerts for them to hurry up and do your plan or anything like that. So if that has happened, it's really important that you chase the NDIA, because they will not be notified that you actually need a plan reassessment date. Even though you have a new plan, supports might not be right, and you may need to have a discussion. So there is this service charter, yes, and it is there to protect and to help explain what you can expect from the NDIS, but it's still flawed. So if that example happens to you, then make sure that you call the NDIA. If you don't get response, then feedback goes in. So to make an NDIS complaint, so that is whether it's about timeframes or whether it's about staff. So you can fill out a complaint form and email it back. There's an online form, or there's a like in that link, in that hyperlink there, you can get, which will be on our on the Fighting Chance website, you can get the online form or the doc. And you can email it, mail it, or you can drop it in a form off at one of the offices. So, but I encourage you to speak up. I know it can be frustrating, but unfortunately, and you've probably heard this, it is a squeaky wheel system, and it just is that way. So if you're not getting the support that you need, unfortunately, the way is to be a squeaky wheel. And to put in a complaint and feedback, and I guarantee you'll hear back. So you can also, you also have every right to go to local MPs or go down that route. But starting here is definitely a less exhausting start. But if you're not getting the response that you need, then definitely escalating it higher. There are some great people at the LAC offices. So sometimes an LAC or a local area coordinator, or an early childhood coordinator, if the person is under 7, is not very nice. And a lot of people don't know this, but if you have a meeting with a local area coordinator or an early childhood coordinator or an NDIS planner, and you don't feel like you have been heard, or you don't feel like you've been treated with respect, you can, or you don't feel like you are going to, your information is going to be considered fairly, you can request another meeting with another person. So they will completely ignore anything that that first person has said, and you'll have the meeting all over again. So if the person, if you get a plan back, so you've waited and you get the plan back and you're like, no, they did not consider my evidence at all, then you can request a review of the decision. So that's a little bit different. But if you are straight after the meeting are like, no way, that person was horrible, then I would call back and say that you would like another meeting with another LAC or another NDIS planner, because you don't feel like you were heard, respected, or your evidence wasn't considered. You don't feel like your evidence was considered. And I do encourage doing that, because essentially, whether it's an LAC or an early childhood coordinator, what their role is they are essentially the middle person between you and the NDIA. So they are essentially in that meeting, their job is to read all of your evidence. And I know a lot of people don't read all of your evidence prior to the meeting. And then in the meeting, gather any additional evidence from you. If they have any further questions, any follow-up questions, anything they want to clarify about what you're requesting, why you're requesting it, and any other questions about previous in your current plan, the utilization, things like that. They might ask you questions about that. That's to gather information, gather a picture. So when they sit down and write their report, because they need to write a report on their system, write a report before building your plan, they have to, if they haven't gathered that information, they're not going to communicate it properly in their report. And their report is what the planner will essentially refer back to when looking at approving the plan. So they will build your plan in the system, and then it goes to an NDIS delegate or a planner for approval. And if that bit, that middle bit with the LAC or early childhood coordinator wasn't done well, or if the person was really disrespectful or didn't listen, etc., they will, there's a risk that they're not going to communicate that clearly enough to the planner, which is going to risk your NDIS plan. So I really encourage you to, at that point, if you feel after the meeting, you feel that feeling like, no, that didn't go well, and you have a sort of grounds for that complaint, I would put it in. And there's some LAC officers, there are people higher up than the LACs, their managers or their manager's manager, that are excellent and really supportive. But if you're feeling like you're not being heard, you can use this online form for the LACs as well. So essentially they're a partner to the NDIS, but they fall into this. So you can provide that feedback, and then they can give that back to you. So what happens, the NDIS or the NDIA, essentially, because that's the agency, has an obligation to act immediately where there appears to be high risk of harm, neglect, or abuse. But they need to acknowledge the complaint within 1 day after they receive it. And they need to make contact with you within 1 day after they receive it. They need to resolve the complaint within 21 days. And then if you're dissatisfied with the outcome, you can also go to the Ombudsman. So that is the NDIA, making a complaint or providing feedback to anyone to do with, so any LAC planner or anyone that's linked to the NDIA. So that's not support coordinators. That's just LACs, so partners of the community, and planners, or anyone that you speak to at the agency. If you want to make a complaint about the safety of a service or the quality of a service, that an NDIS service that you're receiving, and that can include support coordinators, because they're independent of the NDIS. They are funded by the NDIS, but they're not linked to the NDIS or the NDIA. Then you go through the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. So if there's anything happening, whether it's from a support worker, a support coordinator, a clinician, anything that's happening that's disrespectful, abuse, harm in any way, or you just feel like the supports are not delivered to an appropriate standard, then you can make a complaint to the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. They're great, and I do really recommend reaching out to them. You can even reach out to them and call them if you're unsure. But I guarantee that if you're feeling like crap and you're feeling like you're being treated unfairly, it's not okay. So making a complaint is generally warranted. So, but if you're feeling unsure and you're just sort of on, you want to err on the side of caution, giving them a ring and just explaining the situation can be really helpful, and they can talk through it with you. It's also the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission that deals with anything to do with unauthorized restrictive practices. So if somebody uses an unauthorized restrictive practice on you, this often happens with in homes, in group homes, or where someone is there, or in day programs, or if something has happened to a loved one or to one of your people, then going through the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission to report the unauthorized restrictive practice, you would do it this way as well. So sometimes we need to use unauthorized restrictive practices. I'm not saying that it's always bad. It may be in the best interest of that person. So it could be that they're running across the road and someone has restrained them. So that's a physical restraint. And that's not in any behavior support plan or anything. So that's an unauthorized restrictive practice. It needs to be reported. And it's not saying that they're going to get in trouble, but it's just saying that there needs to be that evidence there, and that follow-up to investigate that person is being cared for in the safest way possible. And the form and everything is in that hyperlink, which will be on the website as well. So I know that there's some things in the chat, Ali, so does anyone have any questions? That's all the content or all me talking. Does anyone want to ask any questions, but we can start with the chat, Ali.
The chat's mainly about some audio issues, but all resolved in the end. So okay. No questions in the chat. So feel free to pop some in the chat or take yourself off mute and ask anything. Or any comments or any examples or anything that people have experienced that can add to help other people. Christine, you're on mute. Do you want to just pop yourself off mute? Oh, you're still on mute. You can write it in the chat if you like. Oh, that's better.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Look, apologies. I was late at a meeting with a family. I just wonder and I heard all the coverage of the NDIS. Thank you. But in your details to the participants here about advocacy, did you speak to them about the code of conduct for advocates and consent form signing for advocates?
No, we didn't touch on that.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to say anything on the code of conduct or the consent form? Are you talking more about the consent form for
provision of advocacy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it has to be by did you want to talk and then I can add?
Well, it's just that I'm a parent, but also, and my son is a participant in fighting chance. But this is my 4th decade of advocacy, and I believe that families must be absolutely directive in what they want the advocate to do. I think that there's a consent form that I did devise, and families need to know that they have the right to be and must be fully informed of, and there needs to be a discussion about the person. I never advocated in nearly 40 years for a person where I didn't meet them. I always wanted to meet the person, and I wanted to ascertain the real problem and the quality of supports in home and out of home that the person was being provided with. But then I believe that the advocate has an absolute responsibility to sit down and then agree with the family, if it's to agree with the person with disability, or if the person doesn't have that capacity, to agree with the family or the significant person in their life, what action needs to be taken. And then that advocate must absolutely keep the person with disability or the person acting on their behalf fully informed at all times. And the families must be very directive with the advocate in what they want achieved for themselves or for their family member or other person that they're acting on behalf of. And I would ask for, when you go to any advocacy agency, I would ask for a copy of their code of conduct under which their advocates do their work.
Thank you, Christine. That's really good. I was wondering, so I had I recently was working with a participant who we linked them in with an advocate, but the participant didn't have capacity to communicate that what they wanted, but the advocate refused to speak to the client's guardian and power of attorney, and had a plan nominee, everything, refused to speak to her and had to speak to the participant who didn't understand. And it much distress.
I'm extremely concerned to hear that. Very concerned that anybody.
We didn't continue with that advocate.
Very concerned for any person purporting to be an advocate to act in that manner. And I don't know whether the guardianship that you refer to was for accommodation and other services or for services, but that advocate should not be involved without the consent of the guardian. I'm highly appalled by that. I think sometimes that I have met wonderful advocates, and, you know, going back over 40 years, there's been a number. But I do agree that sometimes I've had people come to me. I've been retired for 4 years, but I'm still providing advocacy. There's not enough advocates out there. But every single advocate should absolutely be acting in the best interest of the person for whom they're advocating. And that advocate could not be doing that without being fully informed.
Absolutely.
And I totally agree with, if anybody feels that they are not comfortable with the advocate, because at the end of the day, advocates have to, in many situations, learn extremely detailed and very confidential information in order to best support a person. So you have to be able to trust the advocate.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel that level of trust, you need to go to another advocate. But in the first instance, I would strongly recommend that you ask for their code of conduct, and then that make sure that they provide you with a consent form, and that consent form covers all the points where the advocate is being directed. As an advocate, I have to say, in the almost 40 years, I think that I've only ever had to have 4 people removed from a family home, and I've advocated, there's been, I mean, the thousands now, and most families and support people do the right thing. Unfortunately, very, very few don't. So I've only ever had to apply to have 4 people removed from a family home. I've had to have a number of staff of different services removed, or face criminal charges, depending on what I go in and find. But I think that the advocate has such a great responsibility. People have to feel comfortable, and the advocates have to actually know the person, what the person is actually wanting them to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine. That's really helpful. And yeah, it just reminded me of that situation as well, which was concerning, because it caused so much distress for the participant and the participant's family, and they couldn't even be on the phone. So
Oh, that's dreadful.
yeah, so it was just awful. So yes, there are some wonderful advocates out there, and then there are some, but that's like everything. But that's really nice to hear that only 4 people got removed. It sort of helps restore a little bit of faith.
Well, it does, and
that
that's
people
because,
actually, there are good people. Yeah. Most people do try and do the right thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can sometimes go a bit pear-shaped, but most people try and do the right thing.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
If no one else has one for the moment, Alex, do you mind if I ask a question? I'm interested in the Quality and Safeguards Commission.
Yeah.
So can you report anybody any provider that you pay for NDIS support, or does it only apply to registered providers?
Right, any.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So a lot of people think that it's so when it's if it is NDIS registered providers, NDIS registered providers go through audit process, as you know, but if they're not an NDIS provider, you can still report, and I would encourage you to, because speaking up and talking about what's happened and reaching out to somebody, if that person isn't the right somebody, then hopefully they're the right person to link you in with the right somebody. And so but yes, definitely, except the registered providers, yes, do need to go through a big audit process. But even still, even people who are registered providers still don't do the right thing. So yeah, definitely, I think a big point that I want to make is that I feel like there's a lot of families and a lot of participants that just put up with being treated a certain way, or they think that their clinician or their support person is right, and they just have to take it. That it's not true. It's not true. There's, if that person is feeling unsafe or uncomfortable, then that's real. And that is an emotion that needs to be listened to. And there's a lot of people that can't communicate that. And it's really sad, because there's a lot of people that can't communicate and don't have the supports around them, and so are not treated properly, and nobody knows. But yeah, I hope that we can get more supports being aware, and more people being aware of the right avenues to get help, so that people can speak up, and hopefully the people who are being treated not right can start to be treated correctly. But yeah, I think disability advocates just can, the people who do such an awesome job are amazing. And so but yeah, it's sad that we need it, but we do. So yeah, but the commission definitely reach out to them. And if you're unsure, I still encourage calling. But yes. I might. Where's the record? Do we
have any more questions at all? Or any comments?